Note that here I have interpreted the text to fit current evolutionary theories. So however, my goal is not to force religion in a current scientific understanding. My goal is simply to demonstrate that the text can accept an evolutionary reading. It can. It doesn't have to be, but it can. My goal is to prove that the current scientific theories, whatever their validity, they do not justify rejection of religious text. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. So I'm talking about evolution. And I was giving the main argument in favor for evolution and the limitations of that theory. That theory at the moment is still akin to belief, like most scientific theories. But here I want to continue to specify that the theory itself is evolving, like, again, any scientific theories. So the idea of evolution itself emerged from observing similarities between living species, as well as from studying the fossil record. So with time, more living species are being genetically sequenced, and the fossil record keeps growing. And in turn, the theory keeps being refined. So the geological analysis of strata shows, for example, the diversity of crustacean species over geological periods of time. Based on these studies, one can trace and date the different massive extinction, like simultaneous disappearance of species, as well as the periods of prolification, like explosion, like the Cambrian explosion. So these geological analyses have, for example, led researchers to dismiss the idea of a progressive evolution and adopt one of a punctuated equilibrium theory, where many species appear simultaneously and then remains for a long period of time. So it's also important to keep in mind when I mention sudden extinction or appearance, explosion, Cambrian explosions, these terms allude to short timescales. But from a geological point of view, the Cambrian explosion still lasts for tens of millions of years. So it might appear fast within the geological timescales, but at our timescales, it is millions of years. That's something not to neglect. So another recent development in the theory of evolution is the study of hot springs, for example, hot springs environment, where we have found a spontaneous polymerization of RNA without the need of any other molecular machinery. So we still don't really know how spontaneous RNA could lead to protocell or protocolonies. But it is a first step. This is just to say that scientists are looking for ways to explain the emergence of life through purely material means, like they do in other parts of science, and they do make progresses. I emphasize that the theory of evolution is itself evolving, and we must expect future adaptations. With it being said, a close-up on the scientific perspective of the theory of evolution, I would like to turn to the scriptures, to the Quran. So in this section, let's imagine that humans are the result of a divine reorganization of the genetic code, as we've been taught in schools. So the goal is to see if we can enforce an evolutionary reading of the text. The goal, in a way, is to see if you can reconcile that scientific vision with the creation of man, and more precisely of Adam alayhi salam, as it is described in the Quran. And the Quran clearly says Adam alayhi salam is the first human being to have been created. God created Adam through kun fayakun. He created Adam from dust. He created Adam from clay, from sound clay, or clay from altered black mud. He created life in general from water. So you have different verses that describe different maybe steps of creation. So from an evolutionist point of view, we assume common ancestry. It turns out that Adam, as the first human being, fit that common ancestry quite well. Some people would argue that yes, one person or a couple like Adam and Eve is not sufficient to create a population. You have a genetic bottleneck theory that says that it cannot be just a few individuals. You need a population. Speciation should take place within a population, not just individuals. All right, you can still say that Adam may be specific individuals within that population. What I'm alluding to is that common ancestry still tells you that we have a common origin, whether it's individuals or a population. Similarly, creation picks Adam as the starting point of that common human ancestry. So both have this idea of common origin. They're not referring to the same origin, but they have this idea of common origin, like both religion and science. About kun fayakun, sure, literally it means be and it is. At first sight, the expression indicates a notion of brevity, like short in time, that directly conflicts with evolutionary process, taking billions of years. But on the contrary, I would argue that kun fayakun can accept the notion of evolution over time, because Allah is free from a concept of space and time, is beyond space and time. What is brief for Him may not be brief for us. And to support this idea, I'll use the same ayat, Ali Imran 59, where Allah compares the conception of Isa alayhi salam and that of Adam, and says that both have been by kun fayakun. So it's interesting because most of the Arabic words are made out of three letter roots, like fa'ala, kataba, darasa. But kun has only two, kaf, nun. So it is short, physically, like literally short. It implies brevity. But when Allah used that kun fayakun to compare Adam and Isa alayhi salam, I understand that Isa alayhi salam went through different stages. Maryam alayhi salam was pregnant. Then she went through a gestation period. Then she gave birth. Then Isa alayhi salam had to grow up. These are different stages that are taking days, months, years. And still Allah mentioned that His creation was kun fayakun. So if in the instance of Isa alayhi salam, kun fayakun implies reorganization of biological material, literally, then maybe for Adam as well. Then the Quran also mentioned that Adam alayhi salam was created from water, from dust, from clay. And one could wonder what Allah means through this. And I will argue that if you take the verses literally, they are conflicting against one another. Water is not like dust. It is not like clay. It is not like sound clay or mud. These are not exactly the same. They are linked, but they are not exactly the same. Which to me means you cannot take these verses literally, otherwise you'll end up with contradictions. Again, water is not mud, is not clay. But you need to mix dust and water to get some clay. So there is a link between them. But that link is already an interpretation of the verses. So then the question is, what degrees of interpretation should you favor? Typically, you go up in interpretation levels if you have evidences. The more evidences, the higher up you have to go. And I would argue that the evolutionary biology brings more and more evidences. They are not perfect. And again, each evidence, you can break it apart and dismiss it, but altogether they show a trend, they show a pattern. I'm not saying it's right, I'm saying it's worth taking it into consideration. So as far as I know, the science cannot explain the passage of from inanimate to animate, from the staff of Musa to a living serpent, from just a soup of biological material to a living cell. It doesn't explain it. But similarly, if you look at the development of the fetus, the passage from a cluster of cells to a living human being is clinically undetermined. The same uncertainty exists with the appearance of consciousness. In fact, whether a man was created from a clay figure or from an original cell or cell colony, current science is unable to explain the passage from inert matter to life. So when Allah talks about the creation of life from water, dust, clay, I see that it can allude to transition from one to the other by reorganizing elements, the same way evolution is expected to proceed through reorganization of genetic material. I therefore argue that the two visions of the world, the religious one through the Quran and the scientific one through the theory of evolution, agree on this notion of reworking of the constitutive element that makes the building blocks of life, from dust and all what it contains, to amino acids, to a fully functional organism. So in another passage, the Quran does mention both types of creation subsequently, first from clay, then from sperm, and then to an embryo until death. If this verse refers to an evolutionary process from clay to the emergence of Homo sapiens, then it has omitted the few million years of evolution that has passed between the creation of the primordial cell from clay and the creation of man from semen. Then I would argue that omission of even a few million years is quite common in the Quran. The Quran does not explicitly state all the steps of a process. So for example, when you read the stories of the prophets like Isa alayhi salam or Musa alayhi salam or Yusuf alayhi salam, we are oftentimes the Quran overlooks their youth, their physical and mental development. But it is assumed that it took place. It just doesn't describe it. It omits describing it. And this regardless of the physical importance and duration. By omitting to state the intermediate steps, God, Allah, focuses our attention on the moral lessons that are to be derived from the text. And I can apply that principle to the creation of man also. So by mentioning water, dust, earth, and clay, I understand that we ultimately come from earth and water. I take the mention of these various elements as a reminder of my humble origin. Indeed, even if you reduce life to an organization at the atomic level of the elements and to a succession of physiological processes, the passage from inert matter that is trampled over, dust, to an intelligent being will always be bewildering, regardless of the theory you adopt, whether it's direct divine action or evolution. If now I accept the possibility of evolutionary process and read the text in light of these assumptions, I would argue that many verses could actually make more sense. So it's not a scientific proof. It's just a subjective appreciation. For example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked to travel the land to witness the beginning of creation, Al-Ankabut, verse 19-20, like travel through the land and observe how He, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, began creation. And I can ask myself, why would God ask me to travel the land to witness how creation began? If Allah refers to the creation of man by a male and a female, well, I just have to look at my parents. I don't have to travel far. If Allah refers to the seasonal growth of plants, I mean, same, I just go in the garden. If Allah refers to the creation of mankind or the origin of life via some supernatural means, like direct divine actions, then there's nothing to see, regardless how far I travel, except maybe the absence of scientific evidence. So this verse would, however, make sense if Allah was referring to origin of life via processes that, one, we are able to study and that are not obvious unless we travel the land. These conditions immediately brings to mind For me, the journey that Charles Darwin took, and which allowed him to develop his first draft of the theory of evolution. Hence, I see through this verse the hint that the creation is a field worth studying, and that it requires in-depth investigation, which is the role played by today evolutionary biologists. So if now I turn to the hadith are at times quite problematic because it is not clear what is authentic and what has been taken from Israeliyat. Even within sometimes the same hadith, we know that some portions are authentic and others might not be that authentic. So for example, the hadith about the height of Adam alayhi salam, you have many different sources. Some mentions the height explicitly of Adam, but most of them don't. And some are stronger than the other, but the fact that you have different matan, different chains of transmissions shows that some part of the hadith are more authentic than others. Regardless, let's take them into account. The hadith will tell you that Adam was created from different earth, that he was created during the last moment of creation, that he was about 30 meters tall. Well, you have to also understand that the Prophet ﷺ was talking to people who were at the outskirts of civilization in the Arabic Peninsula. It's like you going to a rural area and trying to explain a farmer about quantum mechanics. You have to talk to the level of understanding of these people. The Prophet ﷺ had to talk to the level of understanding of his surrounding. We accept that the Prophet ﷺ knew things that were divinely taught. For example, let's say if the Prophet knew about DNA, how could he have explained or talk or described what DNA is to the Sahaba? It's tricky, it's not easy. How would he, alayhi salam, explain a heliocentric model of the universe? He could have, but he would have lost everyone. So I can imagine that his language must be true, like the Prophet cannot lie. That was one of Ghazali's conditions, that you should not never assume that Allah or His Prophet lied. No, he tells the truth, but there's different ways how to tell the truth. You can say it explicitly, or you can use metaphors. So when I read that Adam was created from different earth, and when I read in the Quran that different earth could refer to different characters, then that could imply that yes, indeed, humans have been made with different characters. When the Prophet ﷺ says that Adam was created during the last moment of creation, then actually, depending on how long you take this creation to be, then it fits the evolutionary theory that yes, human being is one of the last species to have appeared on earth. When the Prophet tells that Adam was tall, well, then you can always argue that we don't know which Adam was it. Was it Adam in paradise or Adam on earth? We don't know. That is not explicitly described. Or even what 30-meter tall means. Maybe it means something else. The same way when I say I tried 1,000,000 times. No, I didn't try 1,000,000 times. I maybe tried 10, 12 times. But I say 1,000,000 times as a hyperbole, not to explicitly say how many times I tried, but to express the importance and efforts I furnished in that task. So similarly, Adam being 30 meters tall could refer to Adam's importance. The same way you would interpret the hand of Allah as His power. So as ending notes, So between rejection of prophetic narrations that are contrary to current scientific understanding and their dogmatic acceptance, I prefer to explore the interpretative margins of the text and of science. The goal is to find possibly common grounds and engage in a more constructive discussion. Note that here I have interpreted the text to fit current evolutionary theories. So, however, my goal is not to force religion in a current scientific understanding. My goal is simply to demonstrate that the text can accept an evolutionary reading. It can. It doesn't have to be, but it can. My goal is to prove that the current scientific theories, whatever their validity, they do not justify rejection of religious text. On the contrary, I see that creationism, as described in text, has many more similitude than contradiction with the current theory of evolution. وجزاك الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.